This is Things Police See, First-Hand Accounts, with your host, Steve Gould.
Welcome to the podcast that interviews active and retired police officers about their most intense, bizarre, and sometimes humorous moments on the job. I'm Steve Gould, just as the gentleman said. Welcome to the podcast, everybody. I'm honored and proud to say we're over 800 reviews, predominantly positive, 4.9 stars on Apple Podcasts, which is great. I think we're like 804. Love to get to 1K. It's a little embarrassing. I'm not at 1,000, so if you guys could help me out, put me up there with the big boys, 1,000 would be awesome. If you have a moment, Apple Podcasts, or if you've already done it and you have a friend who has Apple Podcasts, take their phone. I don't care how I get them. Get it done. I appreciate it so much. Thank you to the new Patreon subscribers on Patreon. Links in the show notes. You can go there, join the Patreon community. You get some extras. Patrolman level, you'll get videos, interviews. I'll mail you a TPS logo sticker. And the next level is Sergeant. You'll get a Patron Shoutout, which I do at the end. You can ask a question I'll answer on the show. You'll get the videos. You'll get the vinyl sticker. And for both of them, you'll have direct access to me, messaging, all that stuff. So Patreon's kind of like a little Facebook feed that only you can see. So if you really love the show and you really want to show your support, you can do that on Patreon. Otherwise, if that's not in your wheelhouse, totally understand. The show's going to remain free. All you need to do is do that 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. That'd be fantastic. Turned 43 yesterday, everybody. The big 4-3, which is a weird feeling. I don't know. I think for guys, I've always felt like 20. And there's days when you look at yourself and you're like, I look pretty good. I think I look 20. And then most of the days you can see all the lines in your face and you're like, who is this guy? Who am I turning into? So I've been feeling it a little bit. Luckily, I started the kettlebells next to Billy Broadway, and I'm going to reverse. The Russian guy on the internet said that I could reverse my aging with kettlebells. So that checks out. Internet's always true. I'm going to de-age myself before your eyes. So that's what I have going on. I'm 43, which I guess I don't feel any way about it. I'm glad to still be here. I think it's weird because when you're a kid, there was no way I could imagine being an adult. Like when you're a kid, you try to fantasize about being an adult, being in charge of yourself. And it's like blink of an eye. There you are. I know the older guys are going to bust my balls about this and be like, 43, you're just a pup. Well, to a 20-year-old, and I have worked with people in their 20s, you tell them you're 43 and they're like, whoa, you're old. So I am old to some people. Guys, really, really fun interview coming up today on the show. First time having someone who's an expert in arson investigation. He's an expert in that and a whole lot more. I'm gonna, as is tradition, if someone has a good bio written up, I'm just gonna read that. Why should I try to do any better? I can't. So we're talking about Wayne M. Miller, special agent, criminal investigator, certified fire investigator for the Federal Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. He was in Boston for 25 years, been involved in numerous high-profile illegal firearms, bombing, and arson cases. During his public and 18-year private career, he examined more than 2,300 fire and explosion scenes, plus provided expert testimony in numerous federal and state courts. In August 2019, he published his first book, Burn, Boston, Burn, recently named a Global Book Gold Award winner, followed in 2021 by Bang, Boom, Burn, a 2022 Global Book Silver Award winner. So this guy's got some stuff going on. He had a long and impressive career. Without further ado, I'm going to bring on Wayne M. Miller. Wayne, thank you for coming on the show, brother.
Steve, thank you so much. And I'm 2 months shy of 70.
You look great.
And I know exactly what you're talking about. Your mind never catches up with your head. And, I try to look at my 93-year-old dad, and I say, does he think like the kid that I still am?
Yes.
You never grow out of being that kid.
Yeah.
And besides, I just signed up on your sergeant's rating.
All right. Thank you. That's great.
I like what you do.
Oh, I appreciate that, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
I hope the audience will follow the example of the great Wayne Miller and become a supporter of the show. My father is 75, and he was over last night, and white eyebrows, white hair. He's gone white, and he told me the same thing. He goes, Steve, I look in the mirror and I go, who is this old guy?
Yeah. I play golf with my 93-year-old dad, and the guy just won't realize that he can't hit the ball exactly like he did when he was 50 and 60.
Right.
And, he used to, he would hit like about low 80s, and, we're 140 yards from the hole. And I tell him, Dad, use your wood still. Use your wood. No, he'll take out a freaking 7-iron and he'll leave it 20 yards short. He won't learn that he's 93.
He's not going to take advice from the kid.
Not at all.
That's awesome. He's still out there. How old is he, did you say?
93. And tomorrow he's driving with my kid's sister, who's 65. They're driving to Georgia tomorrow. Wow,
that's awesome.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear it. I don't know about the longevity of redheads, but I'm going to cross my fingers for it. Wayne, so you were a special agent in the ATF. Were you part of customs at one point?
No. ATF became its own bureau. Now, ATF prior to 1972 was the alcohol tax unit, such as the Al Capone days.
Yep.
But became its own separate bureau within Treasury. So you had Customs, IRS,
Treasury.
Secret Service, and ATF, which now is added an E for explosives at the end,
right?
Which nobody ever uses.
No, it doesn't look good in the acronym on the back, And
they're now Justice Department. After 9/11, they all went over to Justice.
Okay, gotcha. So you were a special agent with them. How do you get? How do you wander into the arson expertise? I imagine field level agents, when you start, you're going to get training in arson and explosions. But how do you find your way to being an expert in that?
Sure. The gist of the main thrust of work for ATF is gun cases.
Right.
And 1976, I know that's a long time ago. When I came on in 76, they doubled the Boston district, which is all of New England, from 40 to 80 agents. So they added 40 agents in 1976. Over the next 25 years, they only added 40 agents over 25 more years. So,
wow.
So all of us were working basically gun cases. There was a concentrated urban enforcement, CUE, to get gun crime under control. Just like today,
right.
They need a new concentration on gun crime. So they did that in the 70s, and they brought all us young guys on. So we ended up working undercover cases and paper cases and stuff like that. But that's not what I ended up wanting to do for my career. ATF started to get serious about fires. In the late 70s, they just started. But by 1982, they formed Arson Task Force cities. The first 4 was Boston, Chicago, New York, LA. Because the cities were burning down, and the state and local people, they could do simple cases, but they couldn't do the more complex cases. Say an arson for profit with a landlord burning 20 of his properties or something like that.
Oh my gosh.
Because, the complex cases take time, money, and expertise. So if there's a domestic dispute and the guy throws a Molotov cocktail in the doorway to trap his girlfriend in her apartment, that's a fairly easy crime to solve.
Right.
So the whole, again, thrust behind ATF is to assist state and local people with their problems. And which was, I think, 8 agents and a supervisor.
Wayne, I think we had a little bit. We had a little freeze there for a second. I didn't catch the last couple seconds. You're building up to what you were saying.
So I joined the ATF Arson Task Force, which formed in 1982, March of 82.
Okay.
We had 8 to 10 agents in the group at that time.
For all of New England?
Yes, for investigative purposes. We didn't have our own certified fire investigators yet. Certified fire investigator is typically somebody who's trained to go into a fire scene and dig out the scene, figure out where it started and how it started. ATF started their own program in 1986, which I volunteered for. I wasn't in the military. I didn't learn you're not supposed to volunteer for everything. You know?
Right.
So I volunteered to become a certified fire investigator, CFI, in 1986. I was still in the arson group, still work regular cases, but now, after 2 years, you graduated. You had to go to a minimum of 100 fires in that 2 years and have something like 120 hours of training in the 2-year period. I now have 3,000 hours of fire investigation training. And 38 years, because I did it 18 years on the private side after ATF. 38 years altogether, 2,300 fire and explosion scenes in 43 states, and even in Puerto Rico. That's the only one outside the 48 state contingent states.
Okay.
So it's something that I knew I wanted to do.
It's got to be super interesting.
Oh, think about it. On any one case, you got an eyewitness, and that person could be a homeless person, a cabbie. It could be a homeowner, a business owner. It could be the eyewitness, a passerby. And then you got to interview the owners and the occupants. And then if it's a business, and that's what the thrust is, again, it's the building that burns should affect interstate commerce, meaning you go to your favorite restaurant and they sell you salmon. They don't get the salmon from around the corner. They get it from someplace else,
right?
Out of state. So if the restaurant burns, they can no longer sell the salmon. So it affects interstate commerce.
Okay.
So mostly we would work on businesses, except that as a certified fire investigator, I joined up with my local people in the counties around me, and they invited me to fire after fire so I could see more fires and I could teach them what I've been learning from my training classes. And it was education both ways.
Yeah.
So I knew that it would be so interesting, Steve, that you're interviewing all these people and you got a puzzle in front of you. Like I'm looking at you and me right now. Make these views into a puzzle and try to put that puzzle together.
Right.
And I'd stand in your bedroom that burned up and say, okay, what do we got going on here? What happened here? And you have to look at so much and learn so much.
Yeah, I did insurance investigations for a couple of years, and I did some torched cars. I wasn't really trained in arson. And with insurance investigations, you'd interview a few people and kind of get the, because when you sign an insurance policy, you signed the insurance company, you agree to a SIU investigation. So
yes.
If they don't cooperate, it's a lot easier than police work because you just go, okay, we just won't pay it. And then they go, wait. So, bank records, cell phone records, they got to give it to you. It's great. No warrants needed.
Right.
But, we'd have experts. It was a higher money case. We'd have experts, forensic mechanics, and they were good with arson. But if you're looking at a burnt out car or a house and you don't know, it's like looking at a burnt car, trying to figure out where that originated from, the fire, to me was like could have started at the tailpipe. I couldn't tell anything. So the experts would come in, and these guys were amazing, and they could pinpoint all that stuff. I have a question for you, Wayne. In Massachusetts, the highest state official we have is the fire marshal, right?
Yes.
And is that I should know this, but is that within the state police, or is its own office?
Good question. The state fire marshal himself is appointed by the governor. Okay. However, underneath him, he has the state fire marshal's office, which is in Massachusetts. They are state troopers assigned to the fire marshal's office.
Okay.
In New England, you got Connecticut, they're troopers. Rhode Island, they're not. They're usually retired from someplace else, and they join the fire marshals. Maine, I don't think they're troopers. Vermont, they're troopers. They are, and New Hampshire, they are. I worked with non-troopers up there, so I think it's non-troopers.
New Hampshire does everything a little bit different. They got a lot of freedom up there going on.
Yeah.
So these are the guys. Then you guys are going to each other's burns to get the hours you need and to kind of work with. So mostly in Mass would probably be troopers, or maybe a big city might have a cop specialize in that.
Yeah, the biggest cities, Springfield, Worcester, and Boston, they have a pretty large and efficient fire and bomb explosion, fire and explosion investigators. And they do a lot of their own work. They don't invite the fire marshal typically, but when you develop relationships with these people, you end up working with them as a federal agent too.
Yeah, I bet. Because I remember I just thought of that because what was the movie with Ben Affleck, and he was like, remember it was some line in it like, why does this firefighter have a gun? I think he was like a fire marshal or something like that. Do you remember that movie?
Not with Ben Affleck, I don't. No.
Oh, jeez. All right, well, that went to a dead end. I'm sorry. Wayne, can you, looking back at all these investigations you did, what was the first one as like a young, new to the business of doing these investigations? Was there a real notable first one that you had? One that was really like, complex or interesting?
On the fire end or just ATF?
Either or.
Well, I'll give you a little of both.
Okay.
So I got on in 76 and I really can't remember anything before 1980, but April 1980, I got a call to respond to Walpole, Mass. I lived in Norfolk County, and call from Walpole, Mass. They had a small fire, and I wasn't doing fires yet. I started doing fires later on in 1980.
Right.
And it was in a raised ranch in a garage, and my ex-brother-in-law is the Walpole chief now, but I've talked to these guys since and put in a story into my second book. And they forced their way into the smoky garage, and when they got to a Rubbermaid style trash barrel, they flipped open over something that was covering it, and there was 17 guns in there.
Ooh.
And eventually they saw more guns in the house. They called me right away because one of the Walpole detectives introduced me to my first wife.
Oh, okay.
And so I was very good friends with them. And I was in Boston that day, and I got the call and respond immediately to Walpole. This detective's asking for you. They got these M16A1s, 46 of them.
Old school.
46 M16s.
Wow.
That was stolen 4 years earlier out of an armory in Danvers, Mass. And there were actually 92 stolen. So the other 46 showed up in Northern Ireland.
Oh, wow.
So here I am racing down to Walpole. And, I'm 4 years on the job. I'm all of 27 years old.
Oh, wow. Just a youngin'.
Yeah. Yeah, I got on the job when I was 23. So I'm racing down, and you got this. We beat the state police there. We ended up getting a telephonic search warrant, which was like one of the first ever. So I'm calling to my supervisor, who's relaying to the U.S. attorney to get a search warrant for this property.
Oh, I'd like to be able to do that. That's great.
And it was like racing against the state police at the time and everything like that. And the guy who was in the house when the fire occurred, some woman knocked on his door and said, "There's smoke coming out of your garage." He says, "Oh, I've taken care of it." Like, she understood that to be, I called the fire department. He took off. And it was such a fun case. At one point, I knew Charlie Gallant, it was his name. Charlie was a big drinker. And he came out of Hyde Park. And during this investigation, two guys drive by in a black Cadillac in this little residential suburb. And we had an agent chase them down and identify them. They ended up being arrested later on for being part of this.
Yeah.
But Charlie took off, and he just disappeared for a while. And I knew he was a big drinker out of Hyde Park, so I went to Hyde Park Liquors, and I had bought some guns undercover a couple of years before. The night Elvis died, I was in Hyde Park buying guns undercover. So I remember yeah. Elvis dying. So this liquor store owner had a couple of guns that I bought undercover, and then back then the rightful owner could get the guns back. So I gave him the guns back, and he said, "You ever need anything at the liquor store, just come on in." I never did until looking for Charlie. I said, "You ever see this guy?" Showed him a picture. Never did. And I didn't expect to hear from him. 2 days later, Charlie came in there to buy some booze. And this guy calls up in the middle of the night. Now, ATF back then, you ended up getting to Washington, D.C., and nobody called me until Monday. I didn't find out.
Right.
But we ended up, Charlie got caught drunk driving in Connecticut. And Charlie eventually said, because he wouldn't tell him who he was, he said, "You'd call the FBI if you knew who I was." You know?
What an idiot. The things people say when they're drunk.
Yeah. We got no respect either. ATF, you knock on somebody's door and say, "Hey, I'm with ATF. Can I talk to your husband?" And the woman turns around and says, "Hon, the FBI's here." We get no respect.
Everybody's the FBI.
Yeah. So Charlie, I raced down to Connecticut and beat the state police there again. And Charlie begged me to stay in prison with him that night because he said there's got to be a hit out on me for losing all those guns.
Ooh.
So
Oops.
I said, "Charlie, you tell me who and where and why you had those guns, and I will gladly take care of you." He wouldn't tell me.
Really?
He was an old style criminal. He says, "I've been a thief all my life. I'm going to be a thief when I get done with this." He says, "You got your job." See, the respect for law enforcement was so much different.
Yeah.
You got your job, I got my job. 10 years later, I saw Charlie on the steps of the Dedham Superior Courthouse. And I know who you are. And he said, "I know who you are." And we talked, and he said, "I told you I'd never change." He was there for another B&E stealing stuff,
Yeah, and in Massachusetts, you can just keep coming out the door, the revolving door.
Yeah. He did 8 years for the guns. But,
oh, okay.
So.
Well, the federal law usually has pretty good teeth. Put your way.
So I had to race down there, and here, the thoughts are going through your head when we would, I got brief words that we would cover. There's a lot of guns here and stuff like that. So that was a big case.
That's cool.
On the fire end of it.
Oh, Wayne, let me ask you, what was the fire? Like, why was it?
Oh, that. We think he had a common law wife, but she wasn't involved the night before. Somebody else was. And he had a fire in the fireplace. I think he took the ashes and dumped them in a freaking Rubbermaid trash container. And that's what caused the fire.
Half these people would never get caught if they do something. It's like the guy who's speeding by you pull him over, he's got a warrant. You're like, "Why are you doing 75 and a 50?
Yeah.
Just go to the speed limit and everyone looked at you."
I got 100 pounds of drugs in my car and I'm driving by like a fool.
Right. Those machine guns you're talking about, I remember going to I'm a firearms instructor for the PD, and in like 2005 or 6, I went to a instructor research. So all the instructors meet on the Cape and we go through our guns. And I want to say Marshfield, maybe, their chief had bought a bunch of those guns. I guess the government must have sold a bunch of them, the old M16s. And when it was time to do rifle, the guy said, "You want to see the rifle I got in my trunk? It's in every trunk of one of our cruisers." And we're like, "Yeah." Full auto, full-sized M16. The chief of police bought them and just put them in all the cars and was like, "Hey, if you get into the real stuff, we got machine guns now." I never heard a chief think like that in my life. I'm like, really? Most chiefs were like, "Make sure those are not full auto."
That's right.
Dang.
Yeah. So on the fire end of it, when I was really working fires, there's a couple different things that really stick out in a sense. Um, the Worcester, Mass. Warehouse fire.
Oh, where the firefighters died.
Yeah, 6 firefighters coming up on December 3rd for, if you want to call it an anniversary date.
That was a big one.
1999. I saw it on the news, and I knew it was going to be so big, so I called my supervisor and just jumped in the car and went out. And that was on a Friday evening. And Worcester's only about 20 miles from my house. So I got there fairly quick. And, I stayed most of that night. And for the next 10 days, I was there every single day, except for grabbing some sleep. And,
I bet.
when you're driving to that and you hear on TV that there's, I think they reported at least 4 firefighters lost at that point. And you're driving there and you're just thinking all the horrible stuff, because if they're lost in that type of building, they're gone already,
Yeah.
And, it's 3 weeks before Christmas. Any time is a bad time, but it just, how it's amplified during the holidays.
Sure.
Tragedies. And it's the one that sticks with me the most. My father-in-law was a captain in Revere. My brother-in-law was a captain in Revere. My wife before she met me, lived in East Boston. And the triple deckers are side by side. And 4 of them burned down one night. She was in the second one.
Wow.
And so she lived through a fire. So it's my respect for firefighters is just off the charts.
Yeah, absolutely.
When
you show up to like a warehouse fire, something that big where there's been loss of life, where do you start? Like, what is the first thing you do?
That was a totally different situation because Worcester needed to recover their 6 fallen brothers.
Right.
So in that case, the 6th firefighter was not recovered for 8 days. As a matter of fact, it took 3 days, I think, to get the first one, because it was a 6-story, almost block-sized building that basically collapsed to the second floor. And they had to delayer with heavy equipment. Obviously the roof and 6th floor is the top material. And they laid it out so investigators, firefighters from all over New England were participating and sifting and raking through all that debris to look for button-size remains of the firefighters, looking for any evidence. And the actual physical evidence of the fire, the cause of the fire, was on the second floor. So we didn't have to worry too much about that stuff until they got down. But the state fire marshals, the state troopers, stayed on the deck too. I was off by the side, and I was just watching a lot of this for 8 days until I assisted them. I was one of 3 people that wrote the final report for that case. And I assisted them with the origin and cause of that fire. And, but you start typically on any building, you start on the outside. That's again what a layperson wouldn't think of. How do you solve this fire? The building is like half gone.
Right.
So, and you start with interviews. Is there a person in the building first that you can interview? Obviously there's a first eyewitness who calls it in. The first police officer is usually the one on the, after the call. They get there before firefighters.
Right.
You interview all these people. I've got one in the second book. I think it's like 600,000 square feet, like maybe 7 or 8 buildings. It looked like an absolute war zone.
Wow.
If you and I went there with no information, we would have no idea where to start. But when the first firefighters pulled up, it was at the first floor. We call it AB, the front left side. first floor of one of those buildings. So we knew we had to concentrate there. I mean, that was another 4-story place that collapsed completely to the ground. So eventually we had to get into that first floor in that corner to find out what we had.
When you're in Worcester at that warehouse, for all those days, you must have family members showing up, or that must have been so intense.
It wasn't just family members; it was the city of Worcester showed up. They had a line, obviously about 150 feet away.
Right.
That people just every single day for 8 days behind the barriers. There was an engine company, and one of their older fire trucks parked underneath Route 290, which was right next to the fire building. And that became the memorial. I mean, it was covered with flowers and signs. And that's the one case that I break down at when I talk. I do a lot of speaking events.
Yep.
I talk all over the country. And if I talk about that particular fire, I have a hard time not breaking down when I'm looking at the slide with the engine, with the signs that they had in the windows of that engine and stuff. It just tears me apart. And,
I can imagine.
The crowds there, the press. When they had the memorial, which was only before the bodies were all recovered. It was Friday. Fire happened on Friday. The following Thursday, they had a memorial at the Centrum, the Worcester DCU Center, whatever they call it nowadays. And they had, the vice president came, politicians came. We had about 10,000 firefighters.
Wow.
And all of them couldn't even fit inside the DCU. I think it held 7,500 people. And it was just an amazing, horrible event. And
I remember some criticism about it for the fire chief about, there was no one in there, but so why were they sending the guys in if there's no, unless there was some vagrants in there, but there was no apparent loss of life that was going to happen. But now we have 6 dead firefighters.
It is a vacant for 20 years at the time. And a diner owner, the diner's right next to the building, he said these 2 homeless people sleeping there all the time. And now the fire comes in at 6 o'clock at night. And they don't know. And that's what firefighters do.
Yeah.
They sent in 2, but a cold storage building is an unusual animal. Over the years, it's divided up into different lockers to hang your meat before refrigeration originally when it was built, and you can get lost in there easily. So the first 2 firefighters got lost, and there's no windows from above the second floor. 0 windows.
Oh man, you can't even get your bearings.
Yes, so they couldn't even tell what floor they were on. So firefighters who went to look for him, they sent 2 originally to look for him, and those 2 guys disappeared into the night, and 2 more went in, possibly without being told to go in, and to try to find their lost brethren, and they also got lost and disappeared. So the chief, at that point, I give him the Courage Award of the year. He stood in the stairway where these guys had gone up and gotten lost. And, of course, the firefighters all want to go up and try to find them, in the chance that they're still alive.
Yeah.
And he blocked the stairway. The courage to do that, the balls to do that and say, no more, I'm not going to lose any more. And they would have lost more.
Yeah.
And, they respect him for it. I mean, it hurt at the time, but they respected him for it.
Wow. I'm glad to get that piece of information. That's amazing. God bless those firefighters and their families. That was tragic. I mean, they still have a memorial for it every year, for
every year.
Yeah.
It's usually on TV too. They mention it on the news every single year.
Yeah. Wayne, can you describe like a strange or bizarre thing you've dealt with in your ATF career? I'm sure you have plenty.
Again, the book right on this side of me. Let's see, you got to lean the opposite direction. Bang, Boom, Burn. That's a collection of 21 short stories. Up in Lawrence, the city of Lawrence.
Beautiful Lawrence.
Yeah, we had a case through the state police. They had a guy buying some drugs, and they found out their informant was going to end up being the driver for a guy who was going to blow up a building. It was a laundromat, and they were going to disconnect the gas line, and he was going to cause an explosion that way. So, but we couldn't wire the informant because they were using him on some big drug cases, but he was the driver. So I'm in a van with like four other guys, one of the nicely painted vans back then. And we're parked like right across the street from the building. And I'm in charge of the operation. And we're sitting in the park. It's July, and it's hotter than hell. We got windows open, but we're sitting on the floor. And all white guys.
So
in
humid.
Largely Hispanic area, It was horrible. Car pulls up next to us, and the arsonist gets out on the passenger side right next to my driver's door. And he takes a leak right next to us. I mean, I talk about it. I could have held it for him. That's how close he was, So he goes across the street into the building. And I'm looking at my watch. And like 37 seconds later, he comes out. He couldn't have done what he has to. And I'm in charge. He couldn't have done it. And I'm talking to the guys around me. He couldn't have done it. It's too short a time period. He couldn't have set up anything in that time period. And the car took off with him, and I'm sweating bullets thinking, I'm going to get transferred to Detroit or something. The place is going to blow up, and, I'm going to be a fool. About 5-7 minutes later, they pull up again on the street, and he jumps out again in the middle of the street and goes back in the doorway. Comes out later on that we find out he had forgotten a flashlight. So
people forget stuff. Yeah.
Here I am sweating my ass off, and he forgot a flashlight. And so his nickname was Cookie. So Cookie went inside, and I a couple guys go right next to him, next to the doorway. We had state police surrounded behind the building. We had the gas company on notice waiting. We had Lawrence Fire Department with us. As a matter of fact, right in the van with me was Lawrence Lieutenant. And I told Kevin Ord, who's passed away from brain cancer, I told Kevin, I said, when he comes out that door, we're going to be standing across the street. You take a picture so we silhouette the doorway and the whole bit. Okay, like 2 or 3 minutes later. And right away, the two guys next to the doorway put him down on the ground and put some cuffs on him. And I reached down to the cuffs and pick him up and saying, what were you doing in the building? He said, the owner said I could sleep there, I said, well, let's go see where you were going to sleep. We opened the door. There's a candle it's like 4 steps down into the basement. And there's a candle on the top step. Kevin, take a picture of that, and I'll blow it out right after. So he took a picture, and I blew it out. You could hear the 2-inch main roaring. It doesn't hiss. It's loud.
Ooh.
And I walked down, and I put my flashlight, and I could see the gas end cap was off. The 2-inch main was just flowing.
Yikes.
So many cubic feet of gas. By the way, let's get out of here,
Yeah.
So we get out of there, and the gas company and the fire department come and make it safe. But we wanted Cookie to make a phone call to the owner who hired him to do it. But Cookie was an old-time informant of an ATF agent who retired. And I had to get a hold of that agent for Cookie to talk to him because he wouldn't talk to anybody else. And by then, we couldn't make that phone call. It was too late, and that type of stuff. And
that's nuts.
And And the last part of that's a little twist. There was no film in the camera.
No.
Back in the day of film. Yeah.
Oh, at least you had multiple witnesses,
Yeah. Kevin was working his ass off for Lawrence back then. They didn't have a real arson squad, and he was running left and right, and he just forgot film.
Oh man. Well, you still got him, right?
Yeah, he went to prison for his part.
How much were you sweating? I mean, so you're surveilling this thing. You know what's going to happen. What if that guy you guys allow him to run in there and the building blows up? Would you, I mean, that's got to be on your mind too. Like what if we, because the courts would say, hey, you had enough. Why did you let him go in? Or, whatever they would say, they'd Monday morning quarterback you. So you must have been nervous that he was actually going to, this guy's not a brain surgeon. He could have screwed up and blown the building up, and then they would have been like, the ATF knew he was going to do it, and then they let it happen. That would drive me nuts.
Yeah, it was driving me nuts. I mean, I had the okay of the front office, the bosses, had the okay of the U.S. Attorney's Office. And again, we had the gas company, but, like you're saying, this could have happened almost at any time. And how about when he walked out and I let him go?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. That's so intense.
I was dying 1,000 deaths.
I remember in the little town I worked for on Cape Cod, there was a guy who we got a witness, an informant that said this guy's going to rob the bank. He's got it planned out. He's got the gun, blah, blah, blah. So we get the FBI involved in the whole thing. And similar thing, they were cool with, first of all, they talked to the tellers. Will you play ball if we let them come in? And they said, yeah. Whoa. Like the three female tellers are like, yeah, let them come in. And then the same type of scenario, I was thinking, wow, the FBI is in charge of it, and they're experts at bank robberies. They want the guy that said he's going to go in there with a gun. They want to let him walk into the bank. And I thought, oh my gosh, to make that decision, because, if he takes hostages, what if he shoots somebody in the face? These guys, they're usually drug addicts, it's like they're not, you can't predict them, but yeah, that's why you get the big bucks, brother.
yeah, that's absolutely right,
Oh, man.
So
that is a good one.
Cases.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's get into, I read up a little bit on the Burn Boston Burn. That is an insane story of arson, one of the largest investigated in our country. Can you give us a lowdown on exactly what that was?
I sure can. And it is so crazy that they just bought my book rights.
Hell yeah.
Their intention is to make a dramatic series.
Congratulations. That's amazing.
Yep. They signed the contract, the whole bit. If they can sell it to Netflix or whoever. Yep. I have a screenwriter and a producer already working on it.
Beautiful.
And yeah, they are going to make me executive producer for every episode.
I knew you win. You were on Things Police See.
So executive producer Wayne M. Miller, it's going to be, it's surreal is what it is.
Isn't that cool?
To go from investigator to a writer who self-publishes a couple books. Burn Boston Burn, good title for it. My son-in-law did that cover and the cover for both books.
Gets crazy good reviews too. Ton of reviews.
Yeah, I'm almost up 400, and mostly pretty good. I another podcaster said, I got a bad review because I hated law enforcement or something, but I got a bad review because the pages started falling out the book they bought from Amazon. They gave me 1 star, and you know what that does to your ratings?
Oh. I have people, Wayne, that listen to this show. They're fans of the show. They've listened to 50 episodes, and then 1 episode, they never give me a review, and then no attaboys, nothing. They'll say in the review, I've been a fan of the show for this long, and then they will criticize 1 episode and give me 1 star.
Yeah, hate that.
Well, what about the 50 interviews you liked?
Right.
You give me a one, and like you said, that hurts. A 1 star when you're going for 5. That brings that, we all know how averages are tabulated. That screws you. But yours is, I think it's 4.5 or 5 stars anyways. So you're weathering the storm, brother.
Yeah. And, I take it to heart when I get a bad review. And there were so many fires in this book. These are 9 guys. 3 of them were cops. 3 of them were firefighters who set 264 buildings on fire in 2 years.
What year was this?
From 82 to 84.
Some kind of, were they protesting something because of union malfeasance or whatever?
They were protesting Proposition 2.5. You're from Massachusetts. Proposition 2.5 got voted in November 4th, 1980, the same day that Ronald Reagan got voted in, and the same day that Master Arsonist-to-be, Greg Bemis, turned 20 years old. Greg Bemis is one of the main arsonists in this book.
So what is that proposition?
So simply, if you have a property that's $100,000, it can only be taxed to 2.5% of that value, or $2,500. And Boston, Springfield, Worcester, Lawrence, all the old cities had a lot of low-valued properties. So the cities and towns started laying people off, not knowing where the money was going to come from to pay these people.
Oh, okay.
So I'll stick with Boston because these guys concentrated on Boston to begin with. Boston lost 600 firefighter positions out of 1,700. That's well over 1/3.
Wow.
That's a lot. And they closed 22 fire companies. So think about your firehouses in some small cities where you've been, and you closed down 22 fire companies.
It's insane.
They had painted over the doorways closed and stuff like that. And, the apparatus would sit there and stuff like that. So these guys, in a twisted version of Robin Hood, and I came up with this type of thing, instead of stealing from the rich to give to the poor, they said, if we set enough fires, the people are going to scream, the press is going to pick it up, and they really wanted the press. And that will put pressure on the politicians to find the money to put these guys back on the job.
I see. And
that was the goal. So they started with their first fire in February of 1982. And the arson task force for ATF started in March of 82. It had nothing to do with them. They didn't know about us. We didn't know about them. And it's just pure coincidence. And they ramped up during the spring into the summer. June 11th, 1982 was the busiest night in Boston Fire Department history. There were 11 fires that night, and I think 6 of them were multiple alarm fires. Up to 9 alarms, 2 of them on the same night.
Wow.
9 alarms, the biggest number of alarms that they go to. And they had 2 of them on the same night, and they had a 6 and a 4, I think, also on the same night. So they're running ragged. Like fire companies from Weymouth, from Norwood, we're talking 20 miles away, were coming in to fight fires. They didn't even know how to find the address. You don't have GPS.
Yeah, I'm sure it sucked all the burbs in.
Yes, absolutely. And then when we started getting not onto the specific guys, but started doing surveillances and stuff, then they would go to Canton, Cambridge, Quincy, Everett, Lawrence, Lowell, all the way to Fitchburg. In November 1982, they went all the way to Fitchburg and set 4 major multiple alarm fires in one night. And I love to tease people with this. Somebody almost died that night, and it wasn't by fire. And that's how I teased that night. So that's going to be one episode all by itself, they said, probably, is the night they went to Fitchburg.
Wow, yeah, Fitchburg's not the church I attend is in Westminster. It's right next door to Fitchburg.
Oh, sure.
And, yeah, Fitchburg's interesting town. It's a little rough around the edges these days. But wow, so I can't get my mind around taking an oath, being a police officer or being in the fire service, and then somehow you do the mental gymnastics of the, that greater good thought pattern of this is because you're going to put firefighters and to a lesser extent police officers at risk. Your colleagues, your probably friends, could die because of this. Were they getting attaboys or backing from people that like other firefighters? Were they like, keep it up, boys? Was that happening?
That's a great question, and I do cover that because eventually 200 firefighters did get hurt. Not civilians, because they chose to do abandoned or empty businesses at night, But
Yep.
200 firefighters got hurt. And, one real serious fire, October 2nd, 1982, 22 firefighters came through the roof with broken backs, broken legs, burns, and stuff like that. But these guys were so friendly. They're fire buffs, too. I forget to mention that a lot of times. Fire buffs are just like sports fans. They collect memorabilia. They even buy fire trucks for their own.
I've seen that.
Yep. And they like photographs, so they will go to fires so they can photograph. Now, they photograph it, and they like to watch the firefighting operations. Are the firefighters going to win? How are they going to do? How are they going to knock this one down? These guys would actually cheer for the fire. Okay? They would cheer for the home team. Who's the home team? The fire, not the firefighters. They're the ones who come and visit, right? So they would go to the firehouses and have dinner with these guys, as fire buffs. One was a Boston cop. One was a Boston firefighter himself. These other guys came from outside the city, but they were police. Two became Boston Housing Authority cops, and they were called firefighters in other outside towns. And you make friends, lots of friends. And they could be pulling up on an engine company. Hey, how you doing? Waving to them right after they set the fire. Okay. Ugh, and they would go, there's organizations, professional, organizations call this like Boston Sparks Association.
Mm-hmm.
They're legitimate sparking. Sparking is a nickname for a fire buff. You spark a fire, you go to a fire to watch it. That's what it's called. And two of these guys were members of the Sparks. Two of them would never be allowed. They got voted down. So those guys hated the Sparks Club. And they would go to the Sparks Club picnic. I've been to it with my wife now and stuff. And, firefighters, the engine companies will pull up in Boston, and they'll have they'll cook hot dogs and hamburgers for the guys and stuff, and then they go back to work. And it's a great organization. It's been around 100 years. And I'm not kidding, 100 years.
Wow.
Okay. And so these guys would spark the fires. They'd go watch these fires all the time. And they'd go to the Sparks picnic. And they'd be sitting with the guys.
This is kind of sick.
Oh, it was a strange time because you lost 600 firefighter positions. So the guys on the job saying, oh, I love this, that they were getting so many fires and stuff like that. I wish they'd set a couple on my shift, stuff like that.
Jeez.
And what do you think? He's using, how much gasoline is he? We should collect some money for this guy for gasoline.
Yeah, just joking around.
Yeah, joking around. Because, when you're a big city, when you become a firefighter, a big city firefighter, you're there to fight fires,
it's gallows humor too. I mean, cops do the same thing. They're joking around.
You're not there to sit in the firehouse all the time.
Right.
So they would joke around with these guys, and that gave these guys a big head. They loved it. They loved sucking it up,
Wow.
And they had the picnic in June in the evening, and they went and set 3 or 4 fires right after so these guys could go to these fires,
That's it's incredibly screwed up, man, and bizarre.
It's a bizarre case all the way around. There's so many aspects that are just off the wall.
We'll never be able to cover the nuance that's in the book, but can you let us know how did you wrap it up? How did your lead you to the solving it?
Sure. Boston WBZ photographer who was a fire buff himself, but got paid to be out there shoot these pictures.
Dream
Night
job
after
for a
night.
Sparky, right?
Yes, absolutely. And after my wife, he's my biggest supporter.
Oh,
So,
no kidding. That's awesome.
Yep. And so he goes out and he's shooting November 21, 1982, a lumberyard fire in Hyde Park, Dedham Line. And he hears this god-awful noise. It's a human noise, but it's a god-awful noise. And he comes around a lumber pile and he sees like 4 of these guys leaning and squatting on the lumber pile. And they're hooting and hollering for the fire. And he had some thoughts about a couple. He didn't know all of them by name, but he had a couple bad thoughts that these guys might be involved, you know. And he swung his camera around, and the Boston cop took out of uniform, out of his shoulder holster, pulled his pistol.
Oh, my gosh.
And waved it in the air as if he's on a bucking bronco for about 2 seconds. His friend said, he's filming you, and he puts it back in. And we got to see that the next day and identify these guys. And we knocked on his door, the cop's door, 2 days later at his house. And he
That must have been tense going up to that door, knowing this guy. Number one, he's a cop, so you know he's armed. Number two, he's capable of doing this type of stuff, and you're about to confront him.
He's wacky as all hell, right? You know.
Yeah.
I'm with my partner, a good Irish kid, Billy Murphy, and we knock on his door. He lets us in. He doesn't sweat at all. He just lies right to our face.
Sociopath.
And he was good. He was exactly on it. I describe what a sociopath is in the book.
Yeah.
And I said, these guys must be. But, excuse me, sitting on his living room floor was a stolen firebox, the kind that you can pull up. It might be on a utility pole or a pedestal somewhere.
Okay.
Boston had hundreds of them back in the day. They're considered stolen property no matter how you get it. And he says, I got that at a flea market or something. Billy looks at it close and says, my dad used to make lamps out of these things. And he just wanted to get a little closer so he could read the number off the front. 1712 was the number. We raced back to the office because he had a mimeograph. How many people in your audience know what mimeograph is?
None, including me.
That's how you copied things in those days. It had that blue ink and you copied.
Oh, like a carbon type of thing?
Sort of. But it's before that even. And so he had a copy under his desk blotter that had 14 boxes listed as missing and stolen that year. And that was the first one missing. So that was the first thing. We ended up with a local search warrant, put some pressure on him. He took a polygraph and flunked. Then we couldn't talk to him that was December of 82. And his lawyer said he can't talk. And Boston Internal Affairs conducted their own investigation, so we didn't interfere with that. And we didn't talk to him again until January. It sounds like a short time. 1984, not 1983. 13 months later was the next time we ever spoke to him. But in the meantime, we knocked on a few doors and of his crew. And one of these guys was another cop. He gave me tidbits of information. Tidbits. He never told me that he was involved with setting 50 fires. Ever. But he told me that they stole a brand new unmarked cruiser from Natick Ford. And they stole parts from that cruiser for their own mock cruisers. You know, these guys are all driving around in the LTDs and the Impalas.
Yeah.
Oh, black, you know. And it helped them get away at night. They could drive into Roxbury, Dorchester, Jamaica Plain, and park in the middle of the night. 2 white guys get out in these predominantly minority neighborhoods, you know.
Yeah.
And who else in the right mind would be there except maybe a couple cops, you know?
Sure. Yep.
So they upgraded their own personal cruiser and dumped it into the 4-Point Channel. 4-Point Channel, for those who don't know, is a body of water that divides like downtown Boston from Southie. Okay. They dumped it in the channel. Well, he told me that. This source of information told me that. Why is he telling me this?
Yeah.
You know? Why is he telling me this crap? And eventually, we got the Boston cop in a room and interviewed him with that new information. That we recovered that car with the Boston dive teams. And the stolen parts were missing. You know, the grill and the headlights and a few other parts. And he confessed in January of '84. And then he went to federal court the next day and couldn't talk to us again for another 5 months. Then he decided to help us, and we wired him 17 times to meet the other guys. And that's how the case came together.
Wow, that's amazing. Did he get a sweetheart deal out of that, or did he get some kind of...
You know, he was part of in over 100 fires, plus the conspiracy and some other things. He got a 12-year sentence, which really was a great sentence.
Yeah.
Greg Bemis was the second one. Greg, that's his picture behind me in Burn, Boston, Burn. This way. The camera's not syncing.
Yeah, it's reversed. There we go. Oh, yeah, the cover of the book. Yep.
Yeah. That's his picture of a Jamaica Plain fire. And Greg was the second one in the door. And he signed a 30-year agreement. 30 years to give us testified in trial and be fully cooperative. And it got reduced in federal court back then. After 10 years, you were eligible for parole. And because of his cooperation and everything, he did just a little over 10.
Right. So it's a long time.
The longest sentence was 40 years for one guy.
Wow.
Yeah.
Damn. That's insane. I was reading this. I was reading about it online, and I was like, this can't be real. I feel like I should have known about it. You know, it's like I hadn't heard about that. You know,
it's the same thing right in Boston. Unless you're 55 years or older, you have no inkling of it. Like the Wahlbergs grew up in Dorchester.
Yeah.
And the Wahlbergs grew up during this time period, and they know about it. But yet, most people, including Boston firefighters who are new to the job today, don't really know about the case. And I've had so many strangers say, I'm glad you brought this part of Boston fire history, of Boston history, into a book. And, I have to gig my own book in a sense that the people who give me those bad reviews are the real readers of the world. The firefighters and police read it, and they like the story.
Sure.
But the real readers of the world, the real readers of the world say it's too much repetition. And, I tried to narrow it down. I didn't put 264 fires in there, but I put in, 140 of them. And some of them are only a sentence. But on a good night where they almost got caught by the state police down in Foxborough, the trooper pulled the car over because they went through a red light. And they had just set the fire. It hasn't gone yet. It's like 150 yards away. And the trooper saying, license and registration. And he pulls out his badge, too. And they talk for a minute, and then they screw.
Right.
And, they get away. And there's about 3 or 4 occasions like that they almost got caught.
That's insane. Wow. I'm going to have to ask my father. I'm sure he knows. He's, like I said before, he's 75. I'm sure he knows all about it. That's a huge thing. Obviously it was national news. Dang, man. Glad you caught him. I can't imagine being in your position, being a law enforcement officer, being a special agent, investigating a cop. It's like the guy's betraying the oath. It's like, it must be like a guy like you who is upright and righteous and all those things, doing your due diligence, having to come down on cops. It must suck so bad. And you must also think, like, how did this guy even get this far in law enforcement?
Here's a little tidbit. My partner, Billy Murphy, what a small world. His father-in-law was the head of internal affairs for Boston PD.
Oh, wow.
When we did the search warrant on this guy, Billy was told, you're no longer welcome here at Boston PD. And Billy used to go there all the time, help make cases on other cases and stuff. He said, you're no longer welcome,
Really?
And yeah, they said, he said he got it at the flea market. We believe he got it at the flea market. And other Boston cops eventually helped us. The night that Bobby Grabluski, the Boston cop, confessed, in the room were 2 detectives and a deputy superintendent, and they were very helpful. And they could not believe what he said that night during his confession. They could not believe it at all. They didn't want to believe it either.
That's the thing. These guys, there is a brotherhood, and you have each other's back, and you don't want to believe that he's capable of that, and he's gonna stain the BPD badge, and you don't want to see it happen. But I interviewed a friend of mine from backgrounds in LAPD, Dave Escoto. Such a fun interview. He did Vice and all that fun stuff, and he was eventually a homicide detective, but he was internal affairs for a while, and he said you have to look at it like, policing your own is the best thing you can do for your own agency. Like you really need to get a hold of going after those people who are staining the badge, to get rid of them, because you don't ultimately want their toxicity to stain the whole agency. Who, if you don't catch them early, who knows what they're capable of once they get cocky and they get away with a bunch of stuff, and now they're, it's unbelievable. You're leaving the scene of an arson and you're tinning the guy who pulls you over, knowing he's just going to be like, slow down or whatever. It's gross. It's a gross abuse of power, and it's my hat's off to you, brother. That must have been a really wild ride, and what an unbelievable outcome. Thank goodness you got him.
The weird thing about the book is almost the first half of the book is really, we were stumbling around. We didn't know, once you get a serial arson type case going, you have to identify that it's a serial case to begin with, and then who's responsible. When you're reading the book, I use Greg Bemis's 200 to 400 hour interview of him after his confession and prepping for trials, and then use a 163-page single-space typed journal that he wrote when he went to prison. I know what Greg talks like. I was with Greg 2 nights ago on a Zoom with a screenwriter and producers.
Had you seen him since this?
All the time.
Really? So you have a relationship with him?
I have what I call a friendly, professional relationship.
Interesting.
He never hated us. He never got angry with us. He sent Christmas cards to our office and stuff like that when it was.
So he understood he did wrong.
Yes.
Obviously, he gave you that information. It seemed like he wanted to confess.
So he did this journal in prison. And what he wrote was the same stuff that he told me during that 200 to 400 hours I spent with him, debriefing and prepping him for trial. And so what I wrote in the book, especially in the first half to 3/4, is the actual thoughts, actions, words between the arsonists. Because when Greg says something to me today or back then, it's the same words that the other guy. I interviewed every one of these guys eventually.
That's got to be fascinating reading that.
So it sounds like fiction when you're reading it because you actually hear the words between these guys. And then it gets real later on,
They think obviously they're being righteous. Like they're on a mission, and they've convinced themselves they're doing the right thing.
Yes. When the newspaper picked it up, they loved it. They just sucked it up. When, as a matter of fact, Greg Bemis himself burned a Massachusetts State Fire Academy building. It was an old building. He burned it himself. And He still takes credit for the fact that we have a much newer, nicer facility.
Oh, man.
And, yeah. And eventually something got passed called the Traeger Bill. The Traeger Bill put money back into the cities and towns to help rehire people. And this was on the show Chronicle. You're in Western, you know the show
Oh,
Chronicle?
I love Chronicle. You kidding me? Chronicle was just down in New Salem General Store last year. I love them.
Okay, well, you can find this episode on Google Burn Boston Burn, and you'll come up with the Chronicle episode. They did the full half hour on this story, and it aired in November of 19, and then again February of 20.
That's pretty hard hitting for Chronicle too.
Oh, it is. It's
Usually
really
they keep
stuff.
it light.
Yep. So they asked Greg. We asked Greg, the producer, and I asked Greg if he would participate, and he said, "Nah, it's too close to home." He works for a company today. His boss knows who he is. A lot of people know who he is. He has a different last name because he went into witness protection, when he was in prison and stuff.
Sure.
And so we asked him to participate, and he said no. But he did answer a couple emails. And the very last minute of the show is an email that he answered. And he does take credit for the Traeger bill being passed. It would not have been passed if it wasn't for our unfortunate acts.
Wow. Yeah, so he stayed with the mission the whole time.
Yep.
Unreal. That's really bizarre. When you read that, you were like, damn it.
I did not preview it ahead of time. I didn't know he answered it that way.
Oh, man, that's nuts.
They became domestic terrorists who enjoyed what they were doing too, and screwing with the investigators. They enjoyed that too. So,
yeah, it sounds like they got addicted to it.
They did.
Oh man, that's screwed up. What a crazy and awesome case. Wayne, can you tell us about a heartwarming situation you came across as a special agent? Is there any? If not, we can go right to the next question.
I don't know.
Some guys don't have an answer for this.
The Boston police officer bombing happened in October of '91. I was part of the national response team ATF has. We respond to any large incidents or loss of life or bombings and stuff like that within 24 hours, any place in the country. And, we went to that explosion. It was an outdoor explosion and killed a bomb squad police officer from Boston. And researching it more for the book, for my second book, there's a chapter on that in the second book. And, I take these type of murders and these horrific crimes to heart too. And again,
sure,
when Jeremiah Hurley, who died eventually that night, when the bomb went off, he was with Frank Foley. Frank just died 2 weeks ago or so. Frank lost an eye and had burns and several surgeries and stuff like that. When two uniformed officers who were out in the street came racing up into the yard where the explosion occurred, Jeremiah Hurley, who's dying, said, "How's Frank? Is he going to be okay?" That type of thing. The wherewithal of this guy with the blast. And, tell my family I love them and everything, That just tears you apart. And I didn't know this until I wrote the book. And there was a rookie female police officer who was one of the two that were the first on scene. She later committed suicide.
Oh.
And a lot of it had to do with this case, had to do with this bombing. And, I had some contact indirectly to the family to see if Frank was willing to be interviewed for my chapter in the book. And Frank could not do it. Again, PTSD. He could not do it. And that was 30 years 30 years after the fact. And so to me, that's somewhat, if you want to call it heartwarming, it's tears your heart out is what it does.
Yeah,
You know?
absolutely. We've had guests in the past, a bunch of guests who've, you come on this show and people love to hear a cop talk. They love it. It's like lifting the curtain to hear what you guys actually do. And a lot of times I take it for granted because I've done so many interviews now. Let's hear the stories. And some guys will get into it and they get broken up over it. And I totally get it. I mean, they're asking them to relive these stories that are hugely traumatic. I think it's the rare cop almost that doesn't have some sort of PTSD, some kind of mental affliction from doing this job. And it doesn't matter from small town to big cities. I know cops of all varieties that if you work long enough, if you do a career in law enforcement, you're going to be affected by seeing this stuff. It's not normal. It's not in the course of a life. Most people, especially nowadays when people aren't dying at home, really, you're going to see all the bad things in your community. You're going to be the one guy that's there for everything. When a normal person will see like a fraction of that, just not even close, and it will stick with them, and they'll tell that story about the tragedy that they saw. But then we expect police officers, law enforcement officers, special agents to just constantly incur these things. It's a lot. It's there's a lot of issues out there, and it's great to hear that. From what I hear now, still being an active police officer, they're a lot more aware of it. I mean, even when I started 15 years ago, it was more like, hey, just you have some feelings, there's a number on the wall. You can call this number. Now there actually is like impact teams and people that will talk with you, and they've normalized, the screwed up stuff that we see. Man, that is heartwarming that someone infeasibly, as far as he knows, his last moments is worried about somebody else. I mean,
right.
What a heart on that guy.
Right.
It's incredible. Beautiful.
The first time that I hadn't seen anything bad myself, but I was such good friends with that Walpole, Mass cop, the one who introduced me to my first wife. And he was like one of the first officers at a car accident in his town. And again, Walpole's a pretty small town.
Yeah.
And you can happen on it today, tomorrow. And I've been the first person at a car accident just because it happened like 15 seconds in front of me and on a side country road. But it wasn't horrific. Like, he described that 2 19-year-old girls are shredded in the car.
Yeah.
How do you get over that stuff?
Yeah.
Not easy at all.
Yeah, it's tough. Yeah, even like you said, even on a country road, you can have somebody begging and pleading for you to get them out of the car that they're entrapped in that is on fire and they're burning alive. It's like, it's some crazy stuff. There's definitely crazy stuff out there.
On the private side, there was a propane explosion at brand new condos about 15 minutes from here. And I helped investigate it for part of the insurance afterwards. But my ex-brother-in-law is a fire chief in the neighboring town, and it was his guys were assisting in that scene. And there was the electricians were finishing up. The house was going to be moved into the next week when the explosion occurred. And it totally collapsed and fire started in one corner. And the one electrician who played in a band at my coworker's wedding, my brother-in-law is holding his head up in the water because they're putting water to try to put the fire out in the basement. But he's covered in debris. I mean, covered by hundreds and hundreds of pounds. He's holding his head up, talking to the young guy, like 35 years old, talking to him as he ends up dying basically in his arms. you know,
Man.
because you couldn't get them out. You have people trying to get them out, but they're trying to put the fire out that's going to burn them to death. That the water's going to drown them. This, you know, so, you know,
It's crazy. Let me ask you a question about Walpole PD, because I just had a class at Police Academy, a leadership class, and there was a retired lieutenant from Walpole PD taught it, and he's been retired for quite some time. I can't remember his name, but he had glasses, and he was funny. He was he was a great instructor. Did you know any of those command staff?
I knew all the way up to, you know, a detective who moved up into between deputy chief at one point, and he was a lieutenant too, Scott, and Rick. There was another guy, Rick. Right now, I can't pick the last name. Scott almost shot me one night.
Oops.
Some guys did a robbery of what was the Hojo's type of restaurant? Not the Hojo's, but the other family restaurant that they had. But in the corner of Route 1 and 27 in Walpole, a busy intersection. And they did a robbery there. And there's woods behind there. And I was working with those guys regularly. So when they responded, I was with them. And we're out in the woods at night looking for these guys. And I climb on these curbings. The state had piled these curbings up, you know,
Okay.
the granite.
Yep.
Up about
Big
5 or
slabs.
6. Yes, 5 or 6 feet up. And I climbed on top and laid down on top of it to see if I could see or hear a bad guy. And Scott saw movement up there, and he said, "Freeze!" And you know, he almost shot me that night. But those are the
one of
two
the good
guys
guys.
I remember. Yeah.
Oh man, I wish bringing it up, I should have the guy's name, but I don't remember
Yeah.
it. Wayne, one of the most popular questions we have is advice for people getting into law enforcement. There's someone out there that wants to be a special agent, thinking about it, isn't sure. What kind of advice, somebody with your kind of experience, what could you give to them?
Yeah. If you're going on the federal side, and if you think you might end up moving up someday, you're going to have to move. So be willing to move. I stayed in Boston because I never wanted to go into that supervision. And as I've said before to people, take care of your body, stay in shape, take care of your mind, whatever that takes, whether it's meditation or counseling or what. Be willing to work long, hard hours, and don't give up. Be persistent, patient, and just keep digging. Be that, in the Boston area, be that Trot Nixon, be that Pedroia type. The guys, those second basemen, those guys who dive for everything, dirty uniforms, you know,
Sure.
people outside of Massachusetts, you know your guys, the ones who are always dirty, the ones who always give everything.
Have some grit.
You have to be that. And learn how to talk, and learn how to write, and learn how to listen. Because you're going to talk to a lot of people trying to get information, and you have to listen to get the best information.
Absolutely. Great advice. And it's funny, that listening part helped me in my podcast, because when I was thinking of starting this podcast, I read a lot of reviews about other podcasts. Like, what are people saying about these podcasts? The biggest complaint of a podcast host is he won't shut up and let the guest tell the story. We know Steve, and we know the thing about what we know, the show and the format. And when the guest is always interjecting constantly, that was like the biggest complaint. So I said, when I started the show, I'm just going to, and like you said, in police work, when you're doing an interview, just listen. And even when you're doing an interrogation, silence is okay. You know, you can let them think about it, because they're going to start, people are uncomfortable. They'll keep the ball rolling. So that's great advice. Absolutely. Where can people contact you? Where can they get a hold of your books and stuff? We got a picture of your website right here.
Yep. Go to burnbostonburn.com, and both books are on there. But burnbostonburn.com. Just Google it. You'll find some of my episodes where I've done over 50 live speaking events now around the country.
How many podcasts have you done, Wayne?
About 15 of them.
How dare you?
Yeah. From Florida to Arizona to England.
Good for you.
Yeah, all over the place. You'll find my email right on the website. If you scroll all the way down, it's author Wayne Miller, not Arthur, author Wayne Miller, all one word, at Gmail. Even my phone number, my cell phone's on there. The only social media I ever had in my life is related to the book. Facebook, it says, yep, there. Facebook says Burn Boston Burn. And my LinkedIn, I have over 9,000 police and fire and professors connections around the country.
Holy cow.
Burn Boston Burn is my LinkedIn. If you hit Wayne Miller, you can find me too. And that's about it.
Awesome. Wayne, thank you so much for coming on the show, brother. It was an honor to have you. Great stories, incredible. I mean, we didn't even get close to the nuance they could find in the book, so I'm sure people will be checking that out. It was an honor, brother. Thank you so much. Can you hang up for 1 second when I do the outro?
Sure. I love it. Thank you very much for having me. And if people get the book through my website rather than Amazon, I have color pictures in my book. Amazon does not, and nobody else does. Barnes and Nobles who sell my books, and they don't have it. And also, I sign the book and put it in the mail myself.
You're kidding.
And
that's awesome.
I do it. The books are right. I got 300 books upstairs right now.
Phenomenal. That's great.
So,
all right, brother. Thank you. I'll be right with you.
Very
Okay.
good. Okay, you got it.
Ladies and gentlemen, the great Wayne M. Miller. Man, that was fun. I love getting the nuance and the specialties of law enforcement. Very cool. Thank you, Wayne, for coming on. Guys, thank you so much. As I said in the beginning, thank you for all the 5-star reviews on the show. If you love the show and you want to show your support, 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. No big deal. It's easy. Get it done. I appreciate it. We're at the part of the show now where I'm going to thank the patrons that are sergeants of the show, and also sergeants of my heart, if we're being honest. I'm talking about Wayne M. Miller, Nick Noose, the great Tom Connell, Dennis, got no last name, brother, so just Dennis, Andrew Proctor, George Tessier, also known as Zip, Motor Cop Chronicles, Elian, I know you told me how to do it, I'm sorry, Elian Rogers, Greg Gadboy, Ben Peters, Rick McCormick, Scott Minkler, Parker Brower, the great Tammy Wall, Sean Clifford, Braden Walker, Sasha McNabb, Corey Payne, the great Mike Wynn, Nathan Gowan, Jason Lau, Dylan Pyrozik, the great Sarah Pomeroy, Lauren Stimson, Alex Wazik, Brandon Hooker, Jake Pinedo, John Shoemaker, James Rose, Seth Wright, Tony Fahey, William James Long, that's Deputy William James Longview, Andy Biggs, Chris June, the great Chris June, Adam Mihal, Gary Steiner, there we go, Gary Steiner, and the great Lane Campbell. Thank you guys so much for your continued support. The list is getting long. I hope it gets longer. I'll find a way to extend this track so that it doesn't run out like that. I love you guys. I'm in love with you. I don't care if you're uncomfortable with that. I'm so appreciative. Thank you. Guys, that's the show for this week, and I will see you next time.